Okay, so let's get started. My name is Steve Rosenzweig. I'm a soil scientist and an agricultural science lead at General Mills. Anne-Marie, you can go down to that first slide. I just wanted to show you a couple of General Mills brands here just to demonstrate that we depend on small grains as a food company. We buy oats for products like Cheerios and Nature Valley, wheat for brands like Pillsbury, Betty Crocker, Gold Medal Flour, and many others. And we recognize that healthy and resilient agricultural systems and farmers are a critical part of our business. You can go to the next one, Anne-Marie. And this is a great picture. It's my favorite picture that shows really the difference that farm management can make in the health and resilience of agricultural systems. So there's these natural processes that play out on farms every day. And this is an example of that, showing the water cycle. So this field on the left is flooded. It's not able to infiltrate any of that rain, so the farmer can't use it. And it's also taking nutrients and soil off the field and sending them downstream. Whereas this field on the right has living plants, the soil is covered, and it's able to absorb that moisture and use it for plant growth. So this is a working water cycle just right across the road. And the only difference is in how these two fields are managed. So the idea is that having a healthy farm ecosystem can not only benefit water quality downstream and have these other environmental benefits, but also supports the economic success of the farm. And at General Mills, we have a regenerative agriculture ambition where we aim to support that management that can repair and enhance these ecosystem processes. So you can go to the next one. And that ambition is to advance regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres by 2030. And there's not a universal definition of regenerative agriculture, but at General Mills, we think about it as a holistic, principles-based approach to farming and ranching that strengthens farm ecosystems and communities. And so it's a principles-based approach. And these management principles here on the left, I know are the same that the Soil Health Institute promotes. So things like, minimizing disturbance, maximizing diversity, keeping the soil covered, living root in the ground as long as possible throughout the year, integrating livestock, and doing all of that within the unique context of each farm and ranch. And at General Mills, our approach to advancing regenerative agriculture is farmer-centered. So we're supporting farmers with these multiple aspects, multiple types of resources to help them in their transition to these systems. It's locally led, so we don't just really have one General Mills program that we apply everywhere, but we're really supporting locally led and designed projects that are, in each of these regions that we source from. It's collective, so we're trying to coordinate action with other stakeholders in these places that we source ingredients to work together to achieve shared goals for nature, climate, and people. And it's rooted in science. So we're trying to advance the science of regenerative agriculture to understand its impacts in different contexts. And so here are the outcomes on the bottom that we focus a lot of our research on, things like soil health and biodiversity, water, and farmer economics. And so today we're really here to talk about the economics. And for that, I'm really happy that we could partner with the Soil Health Institute, who we've partnered with on a variety of research topics since their inception as an organization. From everything from soil health metrics to, the topic of the day here, which is the economics of soil health systems. And so, it's been great to be able to work with them, and a lot of the farmers that were in our programs were gracious enough to be part of volunteering their information for this study. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anne-Marie to talk about this recent study.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar to experience our overview of soil health management systems, the economics of soil health management systems on 15 small grain farms in the US and Canada. My name is Anne-Marie Calabro. I'm a soil health educator with the Soil Health Institute. My colleague Erin Gundy is also on the call. She's a soil health educator providing support today. And also joining us is Dr. Archie Flanders, the Soil Health Institute's agricultural economist, to help answer your questions. So feel free to drop those questions in the chat and we can try and answer them as we go along, or we'll get to them at the end. SHI's objective is to provide farmers with a business case when making the decision to adopt the soil health management system. We interviewed in this study 15 farms across the US and Canada, 10 wheat farmers in Kansas and North Dakota, and 5 small grain farmers in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. Our study focused on long-term adopters, averaging 15 years for no-till and 11 years for cover crop. Based on farmer-reported production information, we conducted a partial budget analysis comparing the costs and benefits to soil health management systems, focusing on only the budget items that changed due to adoption. And finally, revenue was calculated based on a standardized set of long-term average prices. This is just a snapshot of the geographic distribution in the US. And here's the distribution throughout Canada. The 10 U.S. farms in this project produce crops on an average of 1,600 acres, cropping wheat, grain, sorghum, corn, soybeans, oats, canola, and various other crops. Annual fallow averaged 50 acres, with an average of 85 acres double cropped each year. The 5 Canadian farms in this project produce crops on average of 3,851 acres, cropping wheat, oats, corn, soybean, canola, sunflower, sugar beets, and various other crops. The 10 farms interviewed reported adopting no-till on all of their planted acres in the U.S. This is the U.S., a summary of the U.S. So the 10 U.S. farms interviewed reported adopting no-till on all of their planted acres. This is considerably greater than the statewide adoption of no-till in Kansas at 48% and 35% in North Dakota, and the overall U.S. adoption rate of 37%. These 10 farms reported using cover crops on 45% of their cropland, as compared to the average of 2% in both North Dakota and Kansas, and 5% for the nation. As stated earlier, these farmers have been practicing no-till for an average of 15 years, and those planting cover crops have been doing so on average of 12 years. Such levels of sustained implementation indicate the effectiveness of no-till and cover crops for others to consider when evaluating the business case for adopting a soil health management system. Now looking at Canada, these 5 farmers interviewed reported adopting no-till on 96% of their planted acres and reduced tillage on 4%. This is greater than the 61% adoption rate of no-till for Canada and surpasses the no-till adoption in each of the regions represented in the study, with 30% in Ontario, 29% in Manitoba, and 78% in Saskatchewan. The 5 farms used cover crop on 61% of their croplands, whereas across Canada, farmers report using cover crops on 23% of their croplands, averaging 26% in Ontario, 6% in Manitoba, and 14% in Saskatchewan. This is the meat of our presentation, so we're going to spend some time on this slide. All the numbers in this table represents averages for the U.S., the 10 U.S. farms in U.S. dollars per acre. Partial budget reflects changes in the net income that result from specific management changes, in our case, adopting no-till and cover crops. We look at both the benefits in the middle column and the costs in the right column. And we can have both a cost and a benefit in the same category. For example, when adopting a soil health management system, a farmer may decrease nitrogen application in one form, like fertilizer, while adopting nitrogen in an alternative form, like applying manure. All farmers reported using cover crops on at least a portion of their crop acreage, with 3 planting them before wheat production. Cover crop seed expense with wheat production averaged $23.50 per acre. The least expensive cover crop was an oat, pea, canola, and flaxseed mix. The greatest cover crop seed expense was a mix of millet, cowpea, radish, sunflower, mung bean, and sun hemp. Additional seed expense averaged $7.05 per acre for all farms. Adopting a soil health management system can also reduce some expenses and increase others. For example, while there's an additional expense for purchasing seeds, certain legume cover crop species may add nitrogen to the system. 3 farmers reported reducing their fertilizer and amendment expenses when using a soil health management system. amounting to an average reduction of $6.43 per acre. Reducing tillage and planting cover crops may enhance weed suppression also and lead to changing or eliminating some herbicide applications. Reducing pesticide expenses average $1.26 per acre, and in other circumstances, additional herbicide is used for weed management and cover crop termination. Such additional expenses average $3.12 per acre. Adopting no-till decreased the cost for equipment ownership, fuel, labor, and other expenses totaling $33.12 per acre. Some additional expenses were associated with planting and terminating cover crops. No farmers reported lower wheat yield due to adopting a soil health management system. One farmer reported an 8 bushel per acre yield increase, resulting in an 8/10 bushel per acre increase when averaged across all 10 farms. Market prices for crops fluctuate, so revenue due to changing yield was calculated based on a long-term average price for wheat. Using that price, the net revenue from growing wheat in a soil health management system increased $4.40 per acre due to increased yield. So overall, a soil health management system increased net income for these farms by an average of $18.98 per acre for wheat. The higher average net income was primarily due to lower costs of producing wheat in a soil health management system. So if we look back on that chart, a couple of lines at the total expense change and do the math there, $40.81 minus $26.23 shows a $14.58 per acre reduction in overall cost. That means that even without additional revenue from yield increase, a soil health management system was still more profitable due to the reduced expense of growing wheat when averaged across the 10 farms. So farms in the study were assigned an identification number based on their order of interview. The net farm income change is represented here in this chart. We recognize that all farms are different and not everybody is going to have the same net farm income change or increase or decrease. So here's a look at the distribution for only wheat. Note that while there's a broad distribution, 7 farms saw a benefit in terms of net farm income. Keep in mind, this is a very small sample size, and we're going to continue to seek out other farms to contribute to this data pool. The range in net farm income for all farms shows that the economic benefits varied for each farmer, with 7 farmers reporting a positive benefit for wheat ranging from $3 to $56 per acre, and 2 farmers reported a decrease in net farm income. The farm with the greatest income increase at $56 per acre had the only yield increase, the 8 bushels per acre I mentioned earlier, coupled with an expense decrease of $12 per acre. The lower net income for the 2 farms were attributed to greater expense and no yield increase. These were the 2 of the 3 farms that planted their cover crops before wheat, and reduced expenses did not offset the costs associated with planting those cover crops. Generally, financial benefits for growing other crops with a soil health management system were reported by these farmers. 9 farmers growing grain sorghum reported a net farm income to increase by an average of $13.93 per acre. 5 farmers growing soybeans increased their net income by an average of $26.64 per acre. 4 farmers growing corn increased their net income by an average of $72.90 per acre. 1 farmer growing oats increased their net income by $47.35 per acre, and 1 farmer growing canola increased their net income by $45.52 per acre. Notably, 6 farmers included grazing of cover crops as a component of their soil health management system and realized additional net income that averaged $86.67 for each acre grazed. Upon incorporating all the effects of adopting a soil health management system on all of these crops, including the grazing value of the cover crops, net farm increased by an average of $55 per acre, ranging from $7 to $143 per acre. In addition to the benefits that directly impact profitability, these farmers also reported other benefits from their soil health management system, such as reducing expenses for owning and maintaining equipment. A soil health management system can also reduce the total value of equipment owned. Long-term capital debt on high-value equipment exposes a farm to financial risk, especially during periods of low commodity prices. All farmers interviewed reported a decreased value of owned equipment, therefore reducing their exposure to financial risk. Other reported benefits were increased crop resilience at 100%, more timely access to their fields at 80%, and improved water quality at 80%. Changes in water quality were based on visual differences in water clarity observed by the farmers, and 80% of these farmers stated that adoption of a soil health management system improved public perception of agricultural production. Most of these farmers in the study were monitoring changes in their soil organic matter levels as well, and 90% reported that those levels increased due to the soil health management system. Measured changes in soil organic matter generally increase by 0.1% per year, and that's attributable to the soil health practices. Research has shown that higher soil organic matter increases nutrient availability and available water holding capacity. This is consistent with the experiences reported by our farmers in the study, where adopting a soil health management system allowed for their reduced fertilizer applications, increased crop resilience, and gave them better access to their fields. So to summarize the work in the US, in this case study before we look at Canada, none of these farmers reported reduced yield. The average cost to produce wheat decreased by $14.58 per acre. With yield being considered, the average net farm income increased by $18.98 per acre. Notably, one farmer growing oats with a soil health management system increased net farm income by $47.35 per acre, and one farmer growing canola increased their net income by $45.52 per acre. Upon including the effects of adopting a soil health management system on all of these crops and including the grazing value, the net income increased by an average of $55 per acre. Other associated benefits reported resilience, field access, water quality, increased soil organic matter. And finally, adoption rates indicate that wheat farmers in this region may improve their profitability by adopting a soil health management system. Now we can go ahead and look at the farms in Canada. Partial budget analysis was conducted to assess changes in expenses with revenue associated with adopting a soil health management system for small grains. Average results for these 5 farmers are presented here in US dollars per acre. One farmer produced wheat and oats in their system, therefore averages are based on 6 small grain crop reports. 4 of the farmers reported using cover crops on at least a portion of their crop acreage, with 2 planting them before small grain production. One farm, using cover crops before small grains production, planted a barley, pea, and fava bean mix before spring wheat and spring oats, while the other farm planted a winter cereal, rye, and clover before spring oats. Cover crop seed expenses averaged $8.75 per acre for the 2 farms. Additional seed expense averaged about $3.50 per acre for all farms. These farmers reported reducing their fertilizer and amendment expenses. 3 of the farmers reported reducing those expenses while using a soil health management system, amounting to $21.02 per acre, when averaged across all 5 farms. Reducing tillage and planting cover crops may enhance weed suppression and lead to changing or eliminating some herbicide applications. reduced pesticide expenses averaged $2.04 per acre savings. In other circumstances, additional herbicide is used for weed management or cover crop termination. Such additional expenses averaged $1.62 per acre. Adopting no-till decreased the cost for equipment ownership, fuel, labor, and other expenses totaling $18.64 per acre. Some additional expenses for equipment ownership and expenses associated with spray applications and planting cover crops did increase with no-till adoption. Yield outcomes varied by farmer. One farmer reporting increased spring wheat from adopting a soil health management system, and one farmer reported a decreased yield for spring oats, adopting a soil health management system. Again, market for all prices for crops fluctuate. So revenue due to changing yield was calculated based on long-term average prices. Using that price, net revenue from growing small grains in a soil health management system increased $3.50 per acre due to increased yield. Overall, a soil health management system increased net income for these 5 farms by an average of $30.62 per acre for small grains. The higher net income was primarily due to lower costs of producing small grains in a soil health management system. Again, if we look back at the total expense change line and subtract $14.69 in additional costs from the $41.81 reduction, we can see it costs $27.12 per acre less to produce small grains. As a result, even if yield did not increase, the soil health management system was still more profitable on these 5 farms due to reduced expense for growing small grains. Like the US, the farms in this study were assigned an identification number based on the order of their interview, and the change in net farm income is represented in this figure. While economic benefits ranged from $4 to $54 per acre, all the farmers reported an increase in net farm income when growing small grains with a soil health management system. The farms with the 2 greatest income increases, $54 and $50 per acre, were the only farms that had reduced expenses from fertilizer and amendments. These were also the 2 farms planting cover crops before small grains. The farm with the $50 per acre net increase had a 5 bushel per acre yield decrease for spring oats, which was offset by the reduced expense due to the soil management system. I'll mention again the small sample size, and we're going to continue to seek out more farms to participate in these interviews and expand the data pool for Canada as well. Generally, there are financial benefits for growing other crops with a soil health management system reported by these farmers. 3 farmers growing corn reported that their net farm income increased by an average of $29.39 per acre. 3 farmers growing soybeans had a net farm increase by an average of $6.84 per acre, and 1 farm growing canola increased their net income by $54.06 per acre. Farm growing sugar beet increased their income by $58.42 per acre, and 1 farm had a net decrease, $14.39 per acre, producing sunflowers. Finally, 1 farm included grazing and realized additional net income of $25 per acre for each acre grazed. Upon incorporating the effects of adopting a soil health management system on all of these crops combined, including the grazing value of cover crops, the net farm increased by an average of $37 per acre across all 5 farms, ranging from $1 to $75 per acre. All the farmers interviewed reported decreased value of owned equipment, reducing their exposure to financial risk. In addition to the benefits that directly impact profitability, these farmers also reported other benefits from their soil health management system, such as increased crop resilience by 100%, more timely access to their fields at 80%, and improved water quality at 80%. And again, like the US study, water quality was based on visual differences in clarity observed by the farmer. 20% of the farmers stated that adopting a soil health management system also improved public perception of ag production. And these farmers also tracked their soil organic matter and reported 0.1% increase per year due to adoption. So to summarize, these 5 farms in Canada demonstrated that it costs $27.12 per acre less to grow small grains, Considering yield and using standardized prices, net income of $30.62 per acre growing small grains. One farm included grazing cover crops as a component of a soil health management system with a value of $25 per acre. Other associated benefits included increased resilience, water quality, field access, and increased organic matter. And finally, this study suggests that farmers practicing conventional production methods may increase their profitability by adopting a soil health management system. We're going to follow up with an email, as Steve mentioned, and include these fact sheets in there so you'll have them, to access whenever you want to review or go back. And that about wraps up this presentation. So I want to thank Dr. Archie Flanders for conducting these partial budgets and offer a special thanks to General Mills for funding the analysis. As a nonprofit, we depend on the generosity of others to conduct this work for the public good. And we also expend a special thanks to the farmers who shared their time and information with us. And with that, I will hand it back over to Steve. Up on the screen right now is contact information for all of us in case you want to reach out to us directly. And now we go into the question and answer portion. Thank you all.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. All right, I see we've got some questions coming in. So Archie, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I see here. Thanks for answering many of them during the presentation. I'll start with this one here about equipment costs. Could you please explain further the decreased value of equipment owned, I think, or maybe potentially the decreased costs associated with owning equipment? They would have expected higher equipment costs due to the use of direct seeding equipment. So can you talk a little bit about how equipment costs show up in this analysis and kind of what you found in this assessment?
Yes. Yes, we have the first figure that you see in the table, in the partial budget table, is a cost per acre for using the equipment. That cost is per acre. That it's not exactly depreciation, but it's a type of annual value of usage for actually having to use the equipment in the field. And the other table had value of equipment. That should be thought about as a stock value without regard to how you may use it. For example, if you go to no-till and stop tilling, you may not need as large a tractors to pull the heavy tillage equipment. That would be one way you could decrease the value. You could also just decrease if you don't keep the tillage equipment that you're no longer using, that would be a decrease in the stock value of equipment. But those are the two differences. The first one in the table is related to annual usage. And then the other table, that's the stock value.
So I'm interpreting that to mean like you're reducing like the wear and tear on your equipment, and there's a lot of cost that goes into kind of maintaining and running that tillage equipment, especially as you're using it in the field. So that's kind of one major cost savings there, right?
That's right. Well, the repair was a separate item in the table. The equipment ownership in that table is it's more of a financial cost. You don't have to replace the equipment. You don't have to take on the cost of as much equipment on a per acre basis. And then the other one is you don't have to own as much equipment in general, whether you use it or not. The other one, the second table, that value is value of equipment, whether you use it or not. In the partial budget table, that is related to actual usage of it.
Okay, so I'm going to jump here to a question about, it's related to crop diversity, I think. So I'll try to take an answer, crack at an answer for this, but I'll also turn it to you, Archie, in a minute. So the question is about, we're shipping in a lot of oats from Canada, and so we're losing small grains from the Corn Belt. And so, how is that encouraging soil health for local farmers if the millers won't consider local grains due to economics? And it's true, for oats in particular, production has largely been shifting north as, increasingly warmer nights in the Midwest lead to reduced oat quality. And it's just been difficult for oats to compete with the economics of corn and soy production. There's been some work that we've been doing, like supporting oat breeding efforts in the Midwest, including our own oat breeding facility in Brookings, South Dakota, which partners with public breeding programs to produce oat varieties that can perform well in that climate. And we're also part of other collaborative efforts to help increase options for crop diversity in the Corn Belt. And also note, we do still buy a lot of wheat out of the Corn Belt. These are soft wheats for cereal and baking products. But for Archie, I know you all have studied the economic impacts of corn and soybean systems as well. So I guess I have a kind of a two-part question for you. One is, can you talk about the economic impacts of soil health in those corn and soybean systems? Did you see similar results to what we found here in the small grains? And the second part is, does your data say anything about the potential impacts of diversifying that corn and soybean system with small grains or additional crops?
Yes, well, we did a large study of 100 farms that was focused on corn and soybeans, primarily in the Midwest. It did include Tennessee. And we had very similar results to this study. It does increase farm profitability for those two crops and other crops to adopt soil health management systems. So it's a very similar outcome. And so the second part of the question has to do with the value of diversifying the small grains with the corn and soybeans. But when we do it, we do it one crop at a time, and the economics of the diversity that would be something largely distinct from just soil health management systems. So that would be a separate study or an expanded study with this. But we do know that when some of our data do pick up that when farmers diversify, they get some also reduced expenses and sometimes increased yields from diversification. But that would be more in general rather than just reduced tillage and cover crops.
Okay, thanks. One question here is about kind of the nature of this sort of study. So were farmers asked about like when those income changes took place, like in their journey of adopting these soil health management systems? Or so like, is this study based on sort of a year-over-year change of economics, or is this based on, over the many years that they've adopted these practices? And do you have any insight of kind of when that income starts to increase and the profitability story kicks in?
Right. The direct answer is it's over time, it's before and after. And let's keep in mind that when we're working with these farmers, we do have a consideration to be efficient with the time. And we conclude these interviews within 2 to 3 hours, and we don't ask them to go back to give us detailed records of when this occurred, even if they have it. But so it is a before and after, which we know at the end it does increase profitability, but we don't have any data for the transition other than just what you could just naturally expect. If you go from conventional till to no-till, you're going to get benefits right immediately from that because you have stopped doing something. You have quit doing the tillage activity. So that's going to be always a reduced expense. Now, when you start to get some of the other benefits, especially when you start adding cover crops, we don't have any information to answer that. And that would be something that's something we're trying to look into, but to collect data for that is much more extensive. It requires more records from the farmer and more time from the farmer. And right now, we don't have any answers to that other than just the general answer that benefits of reducing tillage are immediate. Other benefits are more indeterminate.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions here maybe related to that about kind of the economic impacts of cover crops and maybe understanding that separately from understanding the economic impacts of tillage. Are you able to kind of separate those two in the analysis and say what the economic impacts of different practices are, or are you only able to look at kind of the adoption of the full system as the farmers kind of do in reality?
Mm-hmm. Well, in this study, we with 10 in the U.S. and 5 in Canada, that's only 15 total. We really couldn't come up with any meaningful results to separate this out. But in our other study that involved 100 farmers, we are looking at this, separate out those farmers just tillage and cover crops. And what our preliminary investigation is that you do take on more expense when you plant cover crops. But again, this is before and after. After years, the benefits and reduced expenses catch up with the additional expenses of buying the seed and planting the seed. So you do recoup all the costs of planting the cover crops. But again, this is a before and after, and we can't say if it happens after 5 years, 7 years, 11 years, or when it happens. We just know that it happens.
Yeah, and in addition to reducing costs, do you see, both with that larger study, but also maybe here, do you also see that farmers are maybe increasing revenue with cover crops? There's a question here about, potentially increasing revenue through, using it as livestock grazing, or any other kind of increasing revenue opportunities for the cover crop.
Yes, we reported that in this study, but in our other studies, we see that in some selected cases, it is profitable, but to do that, farmers have to be in a situation. Many of them don't have the livestock themselves to use it. Some do, but when they don't have it, the livestock, they have to have it so they have a market for it. Sometimes nearby farmers will bring in cattle to graze on the farms with the cover crops, and sometimes they'll harvest it and sell it, harvest it and bale it and sell it. We have seen that in some cases. In our other studies, we report that. And just talking to farmers, that seems to have more potential than what farmers are putting in application right now, because the farmers who do it are very pleased with their results for planting cover crops and able to use it for additional revenue.
There's another question here. I think what this is getting at is about maybe linking some of the Soil Health Institute's work across the different kind of research domains that you do. See, I know you all look at what the soil health impacts of different management practices are, and then you also assess what the economics of soil health management systems are. Are you able to kind of link those two things where you can sort of start to talk about the economic value of things like increased soil organic matter or better water infiltration or increased organic nitrogen? Is that kind of any work that's going on at the Soil Health Institute at the moment?
Right now, we don't have any work that is directly associating those two, but we just know in general, as we talk to farmers, the information they give us, they tell us the things that they're seeing, and we can relate that to our other work and information that we have related to the soil health measurements. We do have work addressing soil health measurements, and then when we talk to farmers, including organic matter, we see that they're increasing these factors that would be related to soil health measurements. But right now, we don't have any work that's directly simultaneously connecting these. But I would add that when farmers are receiving benefits, they have to be increasing their soil health measurements in some way. If they adopt these practices and they reduce their cost or increase their yield, it just doesn't happen something in the soil is happening. That would be an improvement in soil health measurements.
Yeah, so I think there's some good opportunity in sort of coupling the on-farm measurement of soil health and coupling with the economic assessment to start to really build some of those correlations and understand what is really driving the farmer decision making that lets them reduce costs, what's happening in the soil. So definitely lots to unpack there. There's maybe one last question that we haven't addressed here, which is like, are we able to talk about small farms? I know like the average farm size here is about 1,000, a little over 1,000 acres. Do you all have any research, or is there an ability to extrapolate to small farms, or if we have smaller farms within this study, to talk about the impacts there?
In this study, we wouldn't have any that we would call small farmers, but we have another study with 30 farms. On our website, it's our NRCS study, 30 farms. And in that study, each farm is reported individually. They were not, in this study, they're aggregated. But in this study, with 30 farms, they're reported individually, and some of those are small. And so you take the principles of increasing soil health. From this study, you would say that it works on small farms and large farms. There is no scale point that tips it over. It works at this scale, but not at this smaller scale. So we do have some smaller farms in this study.
Okay, we're getting lots more questions in here, which is good. One here is about, I think this is relating to, they're talking about carbon credits here and what the economic impacts of those are, but I think maybe broadening that question out to understanding these kinds of external incentives or cost share opportunities, could be from government programs or private sector incentives and payments. Are you seeing the impact of any of those in your economic analyses? And yeah, maybe we'll start there, and I might have a couple of follow-ups related to that.
Okay, in all this work that we do, we intentionally exclude government payments for EQIP and other payments. And the reason is, when farmers report it, they often only get it for a small portion of their acreage, and then they only get it for a selected number of years. It's not something that generally lasts forever. And so we don't include that. So the good point is that all these positive economic results that we're getting are without the payments. And in some cases, the payments are available, so that would even be an additional revenue for the farmers.
Yeah.
And so our work doesn't, we're not directly involved with things like carbon credits, other than the association with soil health measurements that would potentially make some value available for farmers, such for increasing or decreasing carbon emissions.
Okay, that's good to know. So the economic benefits assessed here are kind of independent of government or private, payments. Those would be additional benefit on top of this. And there probably also would have been at some point maybe like a transitional, I think that maybe gets into some of those transitional years, maybe early on in a farmer's journey. I know a lot of farmers, can use EQIP or these other NRCS programs, especially in those early years of the journey. But you're looking at the whole farm economics, so it might not make sense to try and pull in all these pieces that were probably temporary and only for certain fields. So that makes sense. Let's see. I think there's a couple more here. What would you say are the barriers to getting more of the financial baseline from farmers to develop a more kind of in-depth analysis? Like, is there work you all have done to track economics on farms over time, or do you find that it's very difficult to kind of access that level of economic information from farmers to study that transition?
Right. Yeah, we haven't attempted that, and that would be difficult to ask farmers, that they would have to have the records to associate the changes in their inputs that happened in association with their change in adoption of practices. That seems to be a very difficult situation, maybe intractable, but because of the burden on the farmer.
Yeah.
Now, what might be more beneficial in that area is research where you can control some things. And it goes back, you can control this and you can start to measure the soil health measurements.
Mm-hmm.
At different points when you see the soil health measurements change, that implies when some of the economic benefits are going to change also.
Yeah. Yeah, also know we have here in Minnesota, I live here in Minneapolis, and Minnesota has a farm business management program that does help farmers financial kind of record keeping on their farm. And a lot of that information goes into a database that the state maintains. And I think over time, the ambition is to be able to use that database of economic records from that farm business management program to be able to start to understand the economics in these, on a kind of year by year, farm by farm basis. So I think that, we're kind of helping to contribute to that as a longer term study. And I think some of these state level farm business management programs, just because there's kind of that element of helping the farmer with record keeping as sort of a core premise that might help contribute to those studies long term too.
Well,
we've got a couple questions about grain quality, and if there's any impacts on grain quality following soil health improvements. I can share some of we've done a little bit of research in this space. I can tell you just from some of the preliminary results, it can be very difficult to unpack the effects of management specifically on grain quality. Just we don't have like great controls, and really the grain quality is affected by a lot of different things, from the varieties to the environment, the weather that year. And so to be able to say over time, here's the impact of management and soil health on grain quality. I think we're still kind of in those early years of understanding, of untangling all those different impacts and drivers of different grain quality metrics. Archie, I don't know if you have anything else to add from the Soil Health Institute perspective there.
No, I don't have anything to add. None of the farmers have mentioned that as a benefit. That doesn't mean it does not exist, but none of them have mentioned it.
Yeah, potentially something we can track in a future study is ask them if they've been able to. I know especially some of I've heard farmers that feed livestock have noticed those kinds of benefits to things like crude protein levels, and they're the ones tracking it more immediately. So it's I've definitely seen those observations among farmers, and that has economic value. It's just hard to pick out in these maybe more grain production systems outside of the livestock feed. There's a question here about biological services. I'm not quite sure what it's getting at. But potentially, like, are you able to understand? Maybe this question is trying to ask about, like, are there benefits to these cropping systems from soil health on services like pest predation, or I think this maybe gets back to some of those drivers. There's changes in the soil, there's changes in the farm ecosystem, including insects and birds. Those are some other elements of these systems that we're studying here at General Mills. And we know that those have all of these cascading impacts to the crops that farmers are growing. So we've looked at, with the Ecdysis Foundation, we've looked at things like, as these farmers are implementing these soil health management principles, what are the impacts to insect-related ecosystem services, for example, things like pest predation and weed seed granivory. And we do see that those services are enhanced by these management principles as well. So there's a whole biological component, I think, underlying these economic results that start to get at what are the mechanisms by which farmers are able to reduce their costs. I think that's ultimately what that gets to, is like, if there's less, if there's greater nutrient cycling through the microbiology in the soil, that could potentially lead to lower fertilizer use, for example. So I think these are some of the mechanistic drivers that we're still trying to unpack through this research. Anything else to add there, Archie?
I could just add that we hear that from some farmers. The most notable thing would be when they adopt the soil health management practices. In many cases, they begin to see more earthworms. And when you have more worms in the ground, sometimes that brings in more birds. They see wildlife increase. Also, when they plant cover crops, in many cases, it attracts insects that would be considered beneficial insects. And in some cases, they're able to decrease their insecticide sprays because of the beneficial insects. And also, when they're plant cover crops, sometimes they get weed suppression. So they can reduce their herbicides after they planted cover crops for years. So we see some similar things reported to us from farmers that would be related to biodiversity.
Great. Well, thank you, Archie. I think maybe we'll wrap it up there a bit early today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. So thank you everybody for tuning in. It's been a really great discussion. So after this webinar, a short Zoom survey will pop up once the webinar concludes. So we'd really appreciate if you could provide us with your feedback. And after the webinar, you'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to a feedback survey, the webinar recording, and any relevant resources that we might have discussed. So if you have any other questions, please reach out. The contact info was up there earlier. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.